Was it ever considered a crime to simply like a drink? Seriously, imagine a world where a woman's fondness for wine was met with suspicion, a beer a sign of moral failing. Before refrigerators, before the endless parade of perfectly crafted cocktails, alcohol was woven into the very fabric of daily life, and for women, it was a particularly tangled thread. Let's dive into a story, a bizarre, beautiful, and often terrifying chronicle of how women and booze got tangled up in the rules of the world. It began, unsurprisingly, with men. The 16th and 17th centuries were a battlefield of expectations, and the battlefield was often fueled by ale and cider. Think of it, a father, a pillar of the community, suddenly slumped over a table, a dark stain spreading across his waistcoat. The family, the patriarchy, was threatened. A drunken father meant financial ruin, a shattered reputation, and a whole lot of shame. So naturally, laws sprang up, meticulously designed to keep the men upright, sober, and firmly in charge. Drunkenness at Banbury, a little scandal from the 17th century, became a legend, a single, specific indictment of a man for being, well, a bit too fond of his tankard. It wasn't about health, it wasn't about moderation, it was about control. But then something shifted. The rules started to get specific. Suddenly, the focus wasn't just on the male head of the household. Enter the female tavern keeper. Imagine a woman running a bustling alehouse, a hub of gossip and laughter, and being suddenly targeted with a decree: no female alehouse keeper between the ages of 14 and 40. Seriously. Chester, in the 17th century, decided to regulate the drinking habits of women based purely on their profession. It's like saying all bakers must be under 40, and women are the only ones allowed to bake. The logic, if you can call it that, was rooted in fear: a woman in charge of a tavern. A potential source of temptation, a disruptor of the carefully constructed order. Let's rewind a bit. The English Statute of 1606, the one that mentioned workmen, was actually designed for men. But the rules quickly adapted, morphing to fit the specific anxieties surrounding women. It wasn't about a general prohibition on alcohol, it was about controlling female alcohol consumption, particularly within a professional context. It's like a tailor insisting on a specific length for a woman's skirt. It's not about practicality, it's about upholding a particular image. And the enforcement, don't even get me started. The penalties were shockingly harsh. We're talking fines, public shaming, and even imprisonment. Consider the case of a woman in Rouen, France in the 17th century, caught drinking in public. She was whipped for the crime of enjoying a glass of wine. This wasn't some isolated incident, it was a pattern. Women found indulging in alcohol were often accused of being loose, unvirtuous, and a threat to the moral fabric of society. But it wasn't just about taverns, think about the domestic sphere. The Goodman of Paris, a 14th century manual on household management, offered advice on how to moderate a wife's drinking, not for her health, but to maintain her reputation. It was a subtle but powerful message. A woman's worth was tied to her sobriety, her chastity, and her ability to uphold the family's honor. Now, let's talk about the weird and wonderful. Did you know that in some circles, wine was prescribed as a medicinal cure-all? Physicians wrote about the therapeutic benefits of wine, recommending it for everything from digestive problems to melancholy. It's like a medieval version of a wine prescription, a way to fix a woman's ailments, often linked to her perceived emotional instability. The story isn't just about punishment, it's about perception. The idea of a woman enjoying alcohol was inherently unsettling. It challenged the established order, questioned her role in society, and threatened the carefully constructed image of female virtue. It's fascinating how quickly the focus shifted from the father's failings to the mother's transgressions. Consider the world of Renaissance Italy. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, figures of immense power and influence, were often depicted indulging in wine, a symbol of creativity, inspiration, and even divine favor. But for women, the association was different. Wine was seen as a dangerous indulgence, a source of temptation, and a potential route to moral corruption. And let's not forget the role of literature. Chaucer's Canterbury Tales offers a glimpse into the drinking habits of medieval England, portraying both respectable and dissolute characters. But the women in these tales are often depicted as either virtuous and abstemious or as seductive and dangerous temptresses. The literary lens reflected the societal anxieties surrounding female alcohol consumption. The 17th century saw a surge in temperance movements, fueled by religious fervor and a desire to reform society. These movements weren't about individual choice, they were about imposing moral standards on everyone, particularly women. The idea was that sobriety was essential for domestic harmony and the preservation of religious values, but there's a fascinating counter-narrative. In some regions, particularly in rural areas, women played a crucial role in the production and distribution of alcohol. They brewed beer, distilled spirits, and managed the family's supply of drink. This wasn't seen as a transgression, it was simply a part of their daily lives. And then there's the surprisingly complex issue of food and drink. In the Middle Ages, food and drink weren't just about sustenance, they were about status, power, and social connection. The wealthier the household, the more elaborate the meals and the more varied the beverages. But for women, access to these luxuries was often limited. They were expected to manage the household budget, and alcohol was often seen as a frivolous expense. The story of women and alcohol is a tangled web of social norms, religious beliefs, and economic realities. It's a story of control, repression, and, surprisingly, resilience. It's a story of how women found ways to navigate a world that sought to define and limit their choices. Let's jump forward a few centuries. The 18th century saw the rise of the gentleman's club, a space where men could indulge in alcohol and engage in intellectual debate. But women were largely excluded from these spaces, reinforcing their marginalization in the world of drink. And what about the role of alcohol in medicine? Throughout history, alcohol has been used as a medicinal remedy, from wine to brandy to spirits. But for women, the use of alcohol in medicine was often fraught with suspicion. They were seen as more susceptible to its negative effects, and their consumption was often viewed with disapproval. The 19th century brought with it a renewed focus on temperance, fueled by the rise of the temperance movement and the growing concern about the social and economic consequences of alcohol abuse. Women played a key role in this movement, advocating for prohibition and promoting sobriety as a moral imperative. But even as women became increasingly involved in the fight against alcohol, they were still subject to the same societal pressures and expectations. They were expected to be virtuous, sober, and above all, obedient to their husbands. Now let's consider the broader European context. While England, France, and Italy shared a common understanding of alcohol's role in society, there were also regional variations. For example, in Ireland, whiskey was a staple drink, deeply ingrained in the culture and economy. In contrast, wine was more prevalent in France and Italy. The story of alcohol and gender isn't just about specific countries or regions, it's about the complex interplay of culture, religion, and social norms. It's about how these factors shaped the way women experienced and interacted with alcohol throughout history. And finally, let's not forget the role of individual agency. Despite the constraints imposed by society, women found ways to resist and challenge these norms. They drank in secret, they defied expectations, and they carved out their own spaces for enjoyment and self-expression. So the next time you raise a glass of wine or a pint of beer, take a moment to reflect on the long and complicated history of women and alcohol. It's a story of struggle, resilience, and ultimately, a testament to the enduring human desire for pleasure and connection. But one question remains: if a woman was punished for drinking, why wasn't the man who encouraged her to drink punished too?